models and choose the perfect one from a dealer near you. Auto Trader.
Sky Box Sets presents the brand new series of Sky Atlantic's Fortitude. Watch every episode of the returning Arctic thriller.
Are you crazy?
Maybe.
Before anyone else.
Do you think I'm making this up?
Don't know what this is. Don't know what you're doing. Nobody gets out alive.
Watch every episode of Fortitude Series 2, available now exclusively on Sky Box Sets.
You're watching Sky News. The top stories for you now. A US court has rejected an attempt by President Trump to reinstate his travel ban. The government is promising new measures to help renters. The opposition says they'll make no difference. And in France, the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen has begun the most crucial stretch of the election campaign with a speech in Lyon. Well, let's return to Donald Trump's battle with the US legal system. Beth Nielsen is the Director of Legal Studies at Northwestern University and joins me now. Good evening to you. First of all, bring us up to date with exactly where we are and what will happen next in this process.
Well, lawyers in different parts of the country have challenged the executive order issuing the travel ban. And in most cases, there's been issued a stay, which means that the Department of Homeland Security has to stop enforcing that executive order. Of course, Donald Trump's team is going to appeal that decision, and so it'll work its way up through the federal courts of appeals. Last evening, an appellate court said that the ban could not be put into place. So right now, the ban is technically on a stay under judicial order, and yet there are indications that Donald Trump is trying to continue to have it implemented. So that's the struggle we're in right now.
So we're in this appeal process. What are the predictions for how long that might take?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting next few weeks because, of course, this will end up in the Supreme Court if I had to hazard a guess. And we, of course, have an 8-person Supreme Court right now, and Donald Trump has nominated a federal judge to sit on the Supreme Court. So if it goes to the court right now, we have the possibility of a 4-4 decision. Will this person be confirmed before? Will Judge Gorsuch be confirmed before the case gets there? We don't know the order of things. Right now, the court system is moving rather quickly because this does sort of trigger our constitutional qualms, and so the courts are moving relatively quickly.
And what does that say about the Constitution? Does it weaken the position of the president? Is it deemed or perceived to weaken the position of the president, or is it just really demonstrating that the separation of powers?
Well, I think it's just demonstrating how our Constitution is supposed to work. There's checks and balances for everything, right? So Congress gets to make laws, the president gets to issue executive orders, and they're constitutional unless a court says they're not. And so the definitive answer, of course, will have to come at the Supreme Court if it goes that far, which it likely will. The reason it's sort of being presented as a big deal is because President Trump doesn't seem to understand or doesn't seem to care that the judiciary can, in fact, say that something he wants to do is unconstitutional. So the problem is really with the reaction. Things are determined to be unconstitutional all the time. Laws get overturned by the Supreme Court, get upheld by the Supreme Court, executive orders, and so on. The issue here is that there seems an unwillingness in the executive branch to accept the judicial's decisions as we have them so far.
So there is legal precedent for this. This isn't the first time that this has ever happened, is it?
Oh, no. Both, it's sort of executive orders get challenged regularly in the courts. So do laws. And the question of religious or national origin bans also aren't new to the United States, going back to the Chinese Exclusion Acts, the internment of the Japanese during World War II in this country. There's quite a bit of precedent.
But there's a sense that it's different this time, though, now. Is that because, as you were alluding to before, that's the way it's been received by President Trump?
I think both the idea that the that judges are so-called judges if they don't agree with him. He also fired the attorney general who refused to argue his side in this case. So that's the attorney general we try to think of as somewhat independent, even though they're in the executive branch. But the idea is that they're really a check on what the president wants to do before it would get to the courts. And he, of course, fired the attorney general over this. So partly it's the way he seems willing to continue the fight, even though it's going through its normal processes.
And could this go on indefinitely? Could we see appeal after appeal? When's the point where the legal system says this is the full stop and no more?
Well, that would be when it gets to the Supreme Court. And this seems so far to be on the fast track to the Supreme Court. So I wouldn't think that it would take all that much. It won't be as long as some kinds of cases.
And what's been the mood from the legal fraternity in the States as to how this has played out?
Well, I have to say there are a lot of lawyer jokes out there in the States about how awful lawyers are. I have been incredibly proud of our profession. The instant the ban on a Friday night after business hours was signed, lawyers showed up in droves to airports all over this country and sat on the ground writing briefs with their coffees and stayed up all night. And it's continued on. Donations to the American Civil Liberties Union, which will also be taking some of these cases, and immigrants' rights organizations that are putting their lawyering power into these cases. It's been, I would say, pretty unanimous among practicing lawyers that know something about immigration and refugee law that this was not going to be something they were going to let happen on their watch.
OK, Laura Beth Nielsen, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just show you some pictures from Dulles Airport in Washington. These are live pictures coming into us now, still on the Trump travel ban story. And there are some protesters there. I'm not sure you can see their placards. Well, they're waiting. Oh, we've lost the pictures, but they're waiting for the next flight to come in, and we believe they're potentially lawyers because the placards are offering legal advice to people coming in on flights. So people still uncertain as to their status and whether they'll be allowed to gain entry to America, because it is in flux at the moment, although there's been